everybody. Welcome to our second live fireside chat here with QuestionPro. We've got a very special guest today, Tim Cornelius from our US audience team. He actually heads up our audience team here at QuestionPro. This guy knows more about audience, data quality, market research than most people I've met. So I'm really excited for this conversation and excited to have everybody here join us live. Do leave us a comment. Let us know where you're joining in from. This is meant to be kind of a live show, so ask your questions. We're going to answer them as we go. But the topic today is going to be all about data quality. If you've been in the market research space, you know that you cannot trust every response that you get back on your survey. There are people who are out there, just taking surveys for rewards. There's fraud, there's bots, there's a whole world behind the scenes that Tim spends his time in 24/7. Every time I talk to Tim, I almost get this vibe that he's sitting in some NSA, CIA control center somewhere, seeing all these maps on the screens, war room style, knowing where all the fraud is taking place. So I'm excited for this conversation. Tim, welcome to the show.
What an introduction. Thank you, Aseem. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So before we jump in and start talking about data quality, it'd be good just to know a little bit about your background. How did you get started in this space? What was kind of the path that led you into market research and into knowing so much about panel, audience, data quality, and the rest?
Sure. So I started my career, so to speak, in marketing technology, advertising, things like that. I then moved to a company called Gartner, which is the largest IT consulting firm. From there, I was exposed to all sorts of technologies, but the one that really stuck with me was market research and the foresight and insight industry. From there, I got hired at Lucid, the sampling marketplace that was acquired by Cint. And from there, came to QuestionPro. And I've seen best practices and worst practices from hundreds of hires, and been able to find out, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and those things are always changing. It's a up and down graph. So
yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk about both best practices, worst practices, and everything in between. But tell us a little bit more about that background. I mean, clearly, ad tech, I think a lot of systems have these same problems, right? I mean, it's kind of always this battle against fraud. I mean, clearly in the IT space, the security space in general, there's always this cat and mouse game. And obviously you've got this really interesting experience working with the main panel providers, with Lucid and Cint. Tell us a little bit more about that experience at Lucid. What were you doing there? How did you kind of approach this problem at one of the main marketplaces themselves?
Sure. So when I was at Lucid, I was working with researchers to fill, of course, their sampling needs, whatever quotas needed to be closed, any type of investigating link manipulation, statistics, things like that. And I think the most important thing that I found out with Lucid is working across industries and finding out that the type of fraud that you see in financial systems, advertising systems, anywhere that there is a dollar sign on the other side of asking someone for something, an incentive, there will be fraud and there will be bad actors. And there will be people who unintentionally do things that flag as fraud. So it's really interesting seeing, millions of completed surveys come through and analyzing those trends over time.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen so much volume here, and it's right? Like anywhere online where there is money to be made, there will be fraud. Right? I think that's like the underline in all of this. But even more than that, right? I mean, I think some of the things that we've talked about in the past is that, data quality can be fraud, but it can also just be people who are not paying attention and not giving you great answers on your survey, right? It's not even that they're being, malicious or anything, but Now, if you're a researcher and you're paying for somebody to respond to your survey, you want good, authentic answers, right? So we can kind of talk about some of these different aspects. But I think that's a great point, right? And I think it's something that everybody on this show should really realize is that, you know, if somebody is getting incentivized for something online, right, money based, like, yeah, there's a likelihood that you're going to have to at least think about the fact that somebody might be manipulating the system on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was a change from a conscious distortion in misrepresenting themselves at the very beginning of people saying, you know, I'm going to defraud the survey. When I was working at Lucid, someone actually put out a YouTube video that said, here's how you can get paid without taking Lucid surveys. And we had to contact them pretty quickly. But it was basically, they were putting in a little cheat into the URL bar that said, hey, I started the survey, I completed the survey, I paid for it. So that video had tons of hits. I know it's no longer there, but it was wild, man.
There's
Game is crazy.
Always someone trying to game the system. That's for sure. That's for sure. For those of us just joining, you know, we are talking about data quality in the survey space. I've got Tim on the show. Thanks so much for those who joined. Mark, Vignesh, good to see you. Keep the comments coming. Keep the questions coming. But Tim, I think the question that I probably want to start with is like, how big of a problem is this? I mean, do you have a sense of the surveys that are out there, you know, what percentage of responses are fraudulent? Like, how much do we really need to be thinking about this problem as researchers, as people who are building surveys? Have a sense for quantifying this thing?
Sure. So if you're not taking any considerations and you have, say, an incentivized jot form or a Google survey, which no longer exists, I would say that it can be conservatively 40% of your response would be bad. They have, it's interesting to me, and that's why I spend all of my time doing this, and I rely on people that are smarter than me to help me with it, is finding out the fraud that lies within the metadata. So I was trying to get that out. And the stuff that you can't see with your eyes, the stuff you can't actively monitor without all of the specialized tools, and finding out what algorithms are out there that are fighting this.
I mean, it's 40% is massive, right? I think that's a number that I think should stick in people's heads. And obviously it's hard to quantify, right? I mean, you know, we've got all sorts of systems, but you're also talking about a survey that is completely unprotected, right? I mean, I think for the folks that are watching this show, just imagine that you go and you put a public link out there on the web that says, hey, complete my survey and we'll give you $5, £5, you know, some sort of compensation. You just know that public link is going to have fraud, right? That people are going to go there and their only goal is, let me get the $5 at the end of the day. So I think that's going to be your least level of protection, right? You're not going to a panel provider to actually get any audience. You're not putting any protection into your survey to try to screen people out or make sure that we're not kind of counting fraudulent responses. So that's the worst case scenario, right? I think everybody can imagine that that's probably not the right way to field my survey. Walk us through what's the better way to go about it. What are some of those layers and defenses in terms of using the right panel providers, using the right question types, screening technologies, you know, data protection, algorithms? Give us a walkthrough. What are some of the best practices?
Sure. So what I was mentioning, the two providers I was mentioning essentially have no protection on there. If you are working with a platform such as a QuestionPro, such as Alchemer, Qualtrics, anything like that, you're going to cut that number probably in half just by using, without even any data quality concerns on there. thresholds on there. So the things that I would be thinking about are what's behind the scenes, what is the provider tracking, what are they blocking, what do they accept, and are those levels customizable? So
Right.
if I'm doing a survey on veggie patties versus if I'm doing cancer research, my data quality is going to be completely different. But there are some things that I don't want to ever have in a survey. Um, unless I'm doing a recontact, which is talking to the people again that I've already surveyed, I don't want to see the same person in my survey more than once. So
Right.
that's an easy fix. We call it ballot box stuffing at QuestionPro. Turn that off. And there's really sophisticated algorithms and rules out there that are fully customizable to say, hey, I don't want anyone speeding through the survey. You can adjust that threshold. You can work with companies like Research Defender, who are across every single industry and like monitoring fraud. There's companies out there that are looking at honeypots, which are actively inviting criminals into their system so that they can monitor how they react within an environment and ahead of those things that they're doing. And then it's survey design. So not something that audience really thinks about, but your questions that you ask, if you're asking a math question, good luck. That one is going to, you'd be surprised at how many Americans, probably myself included, that would fail these math questions. And you're losing good data from those people. So what I would say is ask people questions about themselves. So if you're getting survey respondents from a panel, when you sign up for a panel, you fill out a profiling survey that says, I am this gender, I am this age, this is where I live at minimum.
Right.
And then from there, I should be able to take that without asking the participant into my survey and say, all right, hey, I'm the bouncer at the club. This person presents their ID. This is who they say they are. And then if I ask them that within my survey, if those answers don't match, that's fraud. One of the most interesting things that I've seen is if you're just tracking the IP address, if you look past the IP address that's registered to the device, and then you look at the location that they're taking the survey, you can have different IPs, which is what I said before. You don't want to see that, but they're representing themselves in the same survey, different locations. So like Florida, New York, Colorado, anywhere really.
Wow. All right. So that's a lot to chew on, right? We got honeypots, we got duplicate IP addresses, we've got all sorts of things to think about. But I think if I'm kind of hearing this correctly, in my mind, it almost feels like there's three layers that you have to kind of think about if you're going to simplify this. One is, where are you actually getting the respondents from? Are you just putting a link out there on the web? Are you going to your own email list where you know that these are real people? Are you going to a trusted panel provider that's already doing double opt-in and some level of fraud protection? So we'll put that in one category. Where are you actually getting respondents from? Second category is, what's the technology that you're using behind the survey platform? So can you detect things like multiple IP addresses? Can you detect things like this person's gone way too fast through the survey, gibberish words, patterns in the responses? So that's kind of a technical implementation, right? You know, hey, we've got some technology that can battle these things, plagiarism detection, things like that. And then the third category is more of a design approach. How am I designing the survey to make sure that I'm getting high quality, unbiased answers from people who are paying attention and people who are who they say they are? So maybe we can kind of walk through each of those. Does that kind of sound like the right way to think about the problem for the folks that are listening in?
Sure, absolutely. I would say that.
So So let's look at number one. So where do you actually get the sample from? So obviously posting publicly on the web, you're opening it up for anybody to come in. That's probably a pretty dangerous situation. If you've got your own high quality email list, then you're in a pretty good space. You know that, hey, this is only going to go out to certain people. But I think where most people sit is like, hey, I got to go find a panel provider that's going to get me some respondents. So how does that work? Like, what do these panel providers do? What do we do as QuestionPro? How do you make sure that when you're working with a panel provider, you're getting high quality stuff coming back in?
Sure. So I'll address the panel provider. The other ones are per the client's needs, but I'll quickly go into them. So if you post a link online for anyone to take the survey, I think that you need to have a very honest and open conversation with your platform and ask them how are they monitoring fraud. So if you have all of your quality checks in a row and you are able to verify a respondent based on their metadata, based on the answers in their survey, you should be able to say, I've screened them, I've personally checked them out myself. They are good or they are not good, and they will get rewarded or they won't get rewarded at the end of it. And that is invaluable. So I like the idea of having the most open approach to having respondents into your survey, because if they come into my survey, if I'm checking 15 different data quality checks within QuestionPro, I've got algorithmic and machine learning, AI, whatever the buzzwords are that are working behind the scenes, plagiarism detection with Chat GPT. I can say, hey, anyone in the world, take this survey. I'll find out who you are. And it'll be either a good respondent or a bad respondent. And I'm going to give you a fail code if it's not a good respondent. So I think that while that is the easiest to defraud, it should be up to the relationship you have with your with the platform provider that should define that. So if they start seeing any negative trends, you should be able to say, hey, I want to tighten this up, I want to loosen this up. And what I mean by that is, the strictness of the open ends or the speeder criteria. If someone's finishing a survey within 1 second, it's probably fraud. Don't incentivize those people. But when it comes to a panel provider, it's almost like they have an email list like you would if you were a brand and had loyal customers. So you have to trust that list, but also have to verify that if you're the one aggregating the panel, if you're the one sourcing those respondents. So I always go from a stance of, I'm trusting what the panel provider is saying, but I've always got my eye on what's coming in because they understand where these people are coming from. You have to understand, how are they receiving the survey? Is it a text? Or is the panel provider, do they have like a Reddit group or a subreddit? Do they have an app intercept? Anything like that? Or are they getting emails? And how are they answering it? And all sorts of things like that. So I think the biggest thing is being able to verify yourself who these people are.
Right.
You can't.
So no matter where you're going, right? No matter if you're going publicly on the web or to a panel provider, you've got to still take responsibility, right? You've got to put in the checks on the survey to make sure that you're getting the right people. Obviously, it's more important if you're going publicly on the web. Sometimes I think with panel providers, you can kind of negotiate a bad response guarantee, right? I know that's something that we do at QuestionPro. If you don't like the response, so you've checked it on your side, you don't feel comfortable with it, send it back. We'll send you somebody else to kind of go in and replace that. So that's always kind of another way that you can work with some of these panel providers.
Yeah. It also helps you meet the demand. You never know how many people are going to answer the survey online. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the Dupol acquisition. I was able to do, how was it, 4 million or something like that in days. Gonna pick your brain about that. But yeah, there's no guarantee on responses, when they're going to come in, what the quality is. But working with a QuestionPro, you're able to get those super fast and don't waste time. For a lot of people, this is a means to an end. Like I've spent 6 months making this survey. I've got the funding for it. Everything's in line. Just get me the respondents to this survey super fast so I can get to the important part, the analysis, the foresight, the insight, and back into it that way. So you want somebody who does this all day, every day, and has decades of experience doing it. It's just
makes sense. So let's talk about that kind of second part. I think, we got a lot of questions coming in here about that kind of like, what should the technology or the mechanism be in the survey that's really kind of tracking some of these things? You've mentioned some of them, right? Speeders, people who are going too fast, duplicate IPs. Now there's this whole chat GPT thing that's happening. Hey, are people plagiarizing or putting in inauthentic responses? What are some of those pieces of technology that you found really cool? Some of the things that we maybe do at QuestionPro that are catching those things? Maybe, what's the most interesting data quality fraud you've seen out there? And what's the technology that we've kind of had to develop in order to combat some of those things?
Sure. One of the easiest ones that we've been using is hidden questions on the page. So simple. Only a bot can see them. Like our system is growing.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if you have a hidden question that says, I don't know, do you like lemonade? Yes or no? And it's just in a survey that has nothing to do with it. It's not visible to the human eye. It's not even in line with the other questions. If that question is answered at all, that's a bot. So we're easily kicking those people out. I don't think we advertise that we do that at QuestionPro, but that's one of the ways that we do.
Interesting.
Yeah. We've also got our chat GPT integration is super interesting because, there's a lot of people out there. We work with a provider that handles copy and paste detection, as well as we've built our own. So people can't just go on the website, on Google, put in something and paste it in. We can track those keystrokes. We're tracking mouse movements. We're tracking, attentiveness to some extent to find out, how attentive is this person taking the survey. If I'm a researcher, I want this to be the most important thing that they're doing in their life. But, sometimes babies wake up and sometimes, dogs start barking. So it's, it as important as it is to you, you have to understand that there's humans on the other side of that interaction. Which brings me to my next point. I've taken all the stances, I've done tons of research, and I continue to learn. And one of the things that I was doing is I said, where is this threshold for data quality? Where do I need to be? Do I need 15 different red herrings in my survey? What are the topics of those? What are the question types? Do I need someone to actually move their mouse and do a slider? Does that help data quality? If I say press number 5 out of a 1 out of 10 scale, or if I drag the cursor to 5, does that help? Does it help data quality if you start the start point at 5 and ask them to move it up from 1 to 10? And I found that when I added more data quality checks in the survey, what I was doing was creating an environment that was kicking out anything that wasn't as smart as the computers. So what I ended
which is all of us.
Yeah, which I thought back on it and I was like, what was I doing? And we went back and rewarded those people, but I looked at the data set and I said, this is wrong. These are I let in people that were using Tor browsers, things like that. They're anonymous, or very known for fraudulent activity. And I looked at all the statistics and found out that I was only, because of the ways that I was asking questions and the security thresholds that I had, I was only allowing the smartest of the smartest bots to get through and complete the survey. So when I looked at the data set, I had 56% bots. It was crazy. It was picking out all these people that I personally knew from being in our panels. And the only ones that could get through were the people that, you know, could outsmart the system and get through the data.
Wow.
So
wow,
that made me kind of lose my stuff, man. I was
too far.
Stronger data quality, and then it comes to a point of no return.
Right. That's a really good point, right? It's a balancing act, and you've kind of taken us into that third category around survey design, right? So we kind of talked about, okay, where are you getting the respondents from? What's the technology behind the survey platform? So, you know, I mean, it's just amazing to think about all the things that we're doing, that we're automatically detecting multiple IPs, copy paste. You know, you mentioned where the mouse is, right? You know, chat GPT plagiarism, all that stuff out of the box. And then there's this third category, which is how are you designing the survey, right? Do you have a question in there that says, hey, move this slider to number 5, right? Show me that you're real. Show me that you're paying attention. And that's an interesting one because you can take it too far, right? You can maybe take it too far with all of these, right? Like, as you know, at some point, even a human can't even pass some of these tests, right? And you're kicking out real people. So it's something to kind of consider, right? It's a balancing act, and that's why we've got Tim sitting in mission control, trying all of the craziest different tactics and seeing what works, so we can kind of recommend them to folks. So, what would you recommend people do in the survey design aspect of this? You know, do they even need to think about this because the platform has already got kind of all the automated data checks? Is there 1 or 2 questions that you add in? You know, typically, does it depend on the type of survey? What's the recommendation? Obviously, we don't want to go as far as that, where you're kicking out all the humans and only allowing bots in. What's the sweet spot?
So this is not the answer you want, but it's different for each person. And data quality should be deeply personal to you and what you would say is fraud. But also, we do have best practices with our team. And that's really dependent on the customer. One of the ways that we're catching fraud, a customer who is super involved in the space came to us and they had a unaided question into the blank of whatever the name of the brand was. And then the next question followed up and piped that response into a multiple or a single select on the next question. So they had to type it out and it was a legitimate thing. And then they had to click it on the next question. And then we got to thinking, like, did they think it was a trick question if they couldn't click the single select? Or is it, should it be good enough that they put in an unaided awareness answer? So it's really, you really have to come up and say, if that's something you absolutely need, then work with us and we'll make sure and get that quality check in. But if you feel like that might be a little much, or you're seeing your response rates completely drop off, which is the point of no return, you are just never going to get to the end of your research. And that's where you brought up a good point. And when we were speaking about this last week, to how you would use statistical significance on another talk, and your sample size is so important whenever you're doing this. So you can round off your margin of error. And if anything's questionable, if your sample size is big enough, just maybe we don't. So I'm going to be tuning in for when you talk about that next time.
All right. Well, everybody keep out for the episode to come on statistical significance. But I mean, that's a good point, right? And I think researchers understand this as well, is that even if you have the right person, it's a human coming in, answering your survey, one human does not represent the end result that you're looking for, right? You're trying to get to statistical significance. And so even if there's one bot that makes it through, or there's one human that makes it through that's kind of being fraudulent, you're already thinking about that through statistical significance, through having a high enough base. And all of these things are kind of a balancing act at the end of the day. So I think this has been a super helpful conversation for me, Tim. I think it's really helpful to kind of think about it in those three buckets. You know, where are you getting your respondents and your audience? Is it a trusted source? Have you negotiated kind of bad responses? Are they doing some checks on their side? Number two, use the right survey platform that has checks built in that can automatically detect these types of things. And number three, think about your survey design. You know, throw a question or two in there that will help you assess, do you have the right person? Are they paying attention? And I think if you do those three things and make sure that you've got a high enough sample size, then as dangerous as this space sounds, you don't have to worry about it too much, right? At the end of the day, we've got ways to address the problem, and you can feel confident that you've got good results that you can go and analyze and report back to your stakeholders at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I do want to add, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't give some actual concrete steps that they could use with their survey design. So what I would say is, if you're going to ask an attention question, attention check or red herring, something like that, make sure that you are not using wording that is above a third grade reading level. And I'm not trying to be rude here, but if you look at the census data that came back, there are a large part of the population that has not passed high school, has not got a college degree. And if they don't know what you're asking them a question about, they won't be able to answer it. So that's one way you're getting out some humans. Another way is ask them questions about themselves. So if you ask them how old they are, maybe later in the survey, you ask them what year they were born, and then cross-check those. I try to limit asking the same question several times, but so my guidelines would be ask them questions about themselves. They typically don't lie about themselves. You can tell whether they're telling the truth. Make sure that you are being very elementary with your questions, and make sure you're working with a provider that can help you sniff out some of this.
I love it. That's such an actionable one too, right? I mean, I think this notion that we've got to make sure that we're not being too smart with this, because that is going to bias your results. But that age one, I mean, that's something that everybody on this call can go and implement tomorrow, right? At the beginning of the question, you ask your standard age question: which age range are you in, right? That's what you can use in your analysis for filters. And then somewhere towards the middle of the survey or end of the survey, pop in a question that asks, what year were you born? And in the survey software in QuestionPro, you can just have that automatically calculate, reference back to the first question, and do an automatic screen out if it's not the right year. So that's an actionable tip for everybody. Yeah. Any last attention track favorite question that you have that you want to share? If you have any others before we wrap it up?
One of my favorite that a customer of mine did at Lucid was, have you ever survived a fatal car accident? That was a good one. Have you ever survived a fatal heart attack? Now that's just when you get a researcher that's like, I'm done with fraud. I'm done with it. And they're asking those questions. So those kind of ridiculous ones are funny to me. But I would, the last thing that I think there was one more thing we want to talk about. Let's see. It's not coming to me. But we'll talk about it another time, I'm sure. So those are
I love it. I think there's so many actionable takeaways here that I think we can do another 2 sessions on this and keep on going. But Tim, this was absolutely amazing. For those of you that are looking for more information on data quality, sampling, fraud detection, check out the QR code that's on the screen. Tim has written a wonderful article in our Experience Journal that really does a deep dive into this, that shares examples. Definitely be thinking about it. But I think to Tim's point, don't overdo it either, right? You can kick too many people out at the end of the day. Trust your survey providers, trust your panel providers, ask the right questions, and everybody will see good data at the end of the day. Tim, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining the call as well. We'll be back on next Friday to chat about something that Tim hinted at, our acquisition of Dupol, and you'll hear the full story there. So join us next week. Thanks for being here on the show again, Tim, and everybody have a great weekend ahead.
Thanks, Aseem.